All right, so today we're going deep on someone who, well, she might not be a household name in the world of philosophy, but she was really grappling with some big philosophical questions. Madeleine de Scudéry. She's our focus today.
Yeah, she's not a Kant or a Plato, that's for sure. But thinking about her, she was a novelist in 17th century France.
Yeah.
Right in the thick of this vibrant intellectual scene. And her novels and dialogues, they really give us this amazing window into how philosophical ideas were circulating back then, especially among the aristocratic circles she moved in, and in her famous Saturday salon, where all these intellectuals would gather.
It was like a philosophy in action, sort of woven right into the fabric of their lives.
Exactly.
But I mean, for the longest time, critics weren't exactly kind to her. Like, she was labeled a précieuse, which I guess we could translate as someone a little too obsessed with refinement.
Yeah, kind of like stuck up, maybe.
Yeah, a bit like that. And her novels, they got a reputation for being these massive, unwieldy things that nobody could actually get through.
Right, and then her philosophical ideas themselves. Like, people just kind of dismiss them as, oh, she's just borrowing from the big guys, nothing really original there.
But there's this really interesting shift happening now, right? Like a whole reevaluation of her work, especially through a feminist lens.
Exactly, and some of the scholarship you sent over really digs into this. We're starting to see the real depth and complexity of her philosophical thinking, her dialogic method, the way she lets these ideas unfold in conversation. It's actually super original and sophisticated.
Yeah.
And her theories on ethics, aesthetics, even theology,
Yeah.
they're way more intricate than people initially gave her credit for.
So that's what we're here to unpack in this deep dive, all these different facets of Scudéry's philosophical thought. And, I'm curious to see how her insights, which obviously come from a very specific historical context, how they might actually connect with some of the philosophical discussions happening today.
Yeah, it's like bringing her voice, this kind of forgotten voice, into a contemporary philosophical conversation.
Totally. So let's jump in. I mean, her moral philosophy, it's so intertwined with the world she lived in, right? This aristocratic society in 17th century France. Like, her dialogues are dissecting these virtues and vices that were so central to their lives. And she really hones in on how women, especially, were thought to embody these qualities.
Yeah, that's one of the things that makes her so fascinating. She's writing from within this very particular social milieu, but she's also pushing back against certain norms and expectations.
Right. And one of the tools she uses to sort of unpack all this is the idea of the distinguo.
Ah, yes. The distinguo.
So help me out here. What is that exactly?
Well, it's basically about drawing these really fine distinctions. Like saying, okay, a virtue, it's not just this one fixed thing. It has all these shades of meaning, right? And how it's expressed. That can really depend on the situation.
It's context dependent.
Exactly. And this is super important when she's talking about those key aristocratic virtues, like take magnanimity, for example.
Right. It's more than just being, like grandiose or something.
Right. For her, it's about having a good opinion of oneself, founded on reason and on the solid merit of one who aspires to great things and contemns the petty. So yeah, it's about self-esteem, but it has to be grounded in actual accomplishments, in your awareness of your place in society. And it always has to be tempered by reason so it doesn't slip into arrogance or looking down on others.
So it's like, be confident, know your worth, but don't let it go to your head.
Exactly. And it makes you think, how does this connect with how we talk about self-regard today? Like the difference between healthy self-esteem and, straight up narcissism.
It's an interesting parallel.
It is.
And then there's politeness. We might just think of that as like good manners, right?
Yeah.
But for Scudéry, it's a much bigger deal.
Yeah, she actually has a whole dialogue devoted to it of politeness. And she says, knowing how to live properly and always knowing how to speak properly, it is the avoidance of any rudeness or injury to anyone. So yeah, it's about etiquette, about how you conduct yourself in social situations. But it's not just superficial. It comes from a place of genuine charity and a commitment to treating others the way you want to be treated. The golden rule.
Right. So it's about creating this harmonious social environment.
Exactly. And that's something we're still grappling with today, right? Like, how do we create these respectful, ethical interactions?
For sure. And then we've got discretion, another one of those crucial virtues, especially, I imagine, in navigating the sometimes treacherous world of courtly life.
Oh, absolutely. In Of Discretion, she talks about how it's expressed differently depending on where you are in the social hierarchy. So towards your superiors, it's about respect, deference, But towards those below you, it's about showing goodness, indulgence, even if it means putting aside your own desires. It's all about keeping that social order intact, avoiding the kind of gossip and indiscretion that can really damage people's reputations.
And again, you can see how this connects to current philosophical discussions, right? Like ideas about social contracts and the responsibilities that come with different social positions.
Definitely.
Now, one thing that really stands out about Scudéry is how she flat out rejects this idea that women are somehow incapable of possessing these virtues. Like,
Yeah.
she's pushing back against that traditional view pretty hard.
Yeah, and this was huge at the time. Like the idea that certain virtues, especially ones with a public or political dimension like magnanimity, that those were exclusively male. She just blows that out of the water.
She's like, nope, not having it.
Exactly. She says, this great quality magnanimity is not banned from appearing in certain extraordinary women. And she even points to figures like Portia, from Roman history as evidence.
So she's saying, look, women can absolutely embody these higher virtues. But she does seem to acknowledge that the way those virtues are expressed might be influenced by gender.
Yeah, there's that nuance in her thinking, like with kindness, for example. She sees that as a really essential quality for women.
She even says kindness is the most essential quality for women. It reinforces the charm of their beauty and of their mind.
Right. Like for her, it's such a fundamental virtue, a woman can't really be considered admirable without it.
Which, I mean, it raises all sorts of interesting questions for us today, right? Like about how virtues have historically been gendered and whether those implicit or explicit expectations still linger.
For sure. Like, are certain qualities still seen as more valuable in a woman than in a man? And how do those perceptions continue to shape our expectations?
Totally. And what about glory? I mean, that's traditionally been so tied to, male achievement, especially in the military realm.
Right. But Scudéry directly challenges that. Of glory, she argues against limiting it to military prowess and excluding women. She says women can achieve glory through their intellect, their moral character. Like, ladies have glory when their mind exceeds their beauty, and when they have so much moral merit that one can still love them when they have lost everything that made them physically beautiful.
So it's about inner qualities, not just external achievements.
Exactly. And she even draws this really interesting parallel between men's military wars and what she calls the romantic wars that women engage in.
Romantic war. That's fascinating.
Yeah, she uses that same martial language to talk about the complexities of love and relationships.
It's like she's reframing the whole concept of glory.
Exactly. She says, glory is something which necessarily arises from any act of virtue, just as light necessarily arises from the sun, which produces it.
It's almost like an emanation of virtue itself.
Yeah, and that includes the internal glory that comes from conquering your own passions, your own inner demons. That's a battle anyone can fight, regardless of gender or social standing.
It's about mastering yourself, your inner world.
Exactly.
And we can't forget the role of Christianity in all of this. Like, how does that faith inform her understanding of virtue?
Yeah, so she sees Christianity as kind of elevating those natural virtues through grace.
Right.
Like, take modesty, for example. It's a valued virtue in her aristocratic context, right?
Right.
But through Christianity, it becomes Christian humility, which is a much deeper recognition of your own weaknesses, your failings in the eyes of God.
It's not just about being demure. It's about genuine self-reflection, repentance.
Exactly.
But of course, she doesn't shy away from the dark side, right? The vices that lurk alongside those virtues.
Oh, yeah, she dives right into those. And they often have this very specific courtly flavor. Flattery, dissimulation, mockery, envy, vanity, all those things that can poison social interactions.
And I imagine in that world of courtly intrigue, those vices were often masked, hidden beneath a veneer of politeness.
Exactly. It's like a game of appearances where everyone's trying to outmaneuver each other. And she also talks about how ambition, which is obviously a powerful driving force in that kind of environment, how it can twist the Christian virtue of hope into something really selfish and ultimately unsatisfying.
She says, the entire life of the court is nothing but hope. That is where one always dies in hoping for something.
Yeah, that's a pretty bleak assessment of courtly life.
And she seems especially concerned about the vice of lying.
Oh, absolutely. For her, mendacity, any kind of attack on truth, that's a major offense. It undermines the trust that's essential for any society to function, and it blocks genuine communication.
You can see how that would be a big deal for her, especially given her emphasis on conversation and dialogue.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't sound like she just lays out these virtues and vices as this black and white list of do's and don'ts. Her analysis seems much more nuanced than that.
Yeah, she really emphasizes the subtle gradations within those virtues. Like, she says kindness has 100 sorts, and while it's generally a good thing, it can become a vice if it's not guided by reason and judgment. Even anger, which we usually think of as bad, she sees it as having a more ambiguous nature. Like, sometimes it's justified.
Like righteous anger.
Exactly. Or when it's used to correct some wrong.
Okay.
So it's not about these rigid categories. It's about understanding the complexity of human motivation and action.
Which, again, I think really resonates with contemporary philosophical debates about virtue ethics and how hard it is to apply those abstract principles to real-life situations.
Definitely.
But even with all that nuance, it doesn't sound like she just throws up her hands and says, well, morality is totally relative, anything goes.
No, she pushes back against that kind of moral relativism pretty hard. There are certain actions, she says, like lying or, politically motivated murder. Those are just plain wrong, no matter what. Even if everyone's doing it or it's politically expedient, it doesn't matter. She even criticizes customs like polygamy, saying neither nature nor reason could have authorized this custom.
So she's grounding her ethics in something more fundamental than just social convention.
Exactly.
So moving from how we should act to the inner workings of our moral compass, what's going on in Scudéry's moral psychology?
Well, she's really interested in the interplay between temperament and free will. Temperament, she sees that as mostly biological, the kind of stuff you're born with. It shapes your inclinations, your tendencies towards certain emotions and behaviors. But free will, that's what ultimately determines your moral character, about how you choose to direct those inclinations, using reason and willpower.
So it's that classic nature versus nurture debate playing out in the realm of moral psychology.
Yeah, pretty much.
And she brings in those classical ideas about the four humors, right?
Oh, yeah. She totally buys into that whole system. Choleric, melancholic, sanguine, phlegmatic, those bodily fluids that were thought to influence everything about you.
Your personality, your moods.
Exactly. She says the humors often carry the mind away and seduce it according to their caprices, which is why, she thinks, people react so differently to the same things. It's like everyone's got this unique internal cocktail of humors messing with their perceptions.
It's a pretty interesting, if outdated, way to explain those individual differences.
It is.
But it's not like she's saying we're just puppets of our biology, right? Free will still has a huge role to play.
Oh, for sure. She makes this distinction between desires, which she sees as these kind of irrational urges coming from your temperament, and wishes, which are based in reason and deliberation. Like, wishes must be the work of reason, but desires are nearly always blind powers which are born from temperament. So desires can lead you astray if you're not careful. But your will, guided by reason, can keep them in check.
So it's like this constant internal struggle between those base desires and our higher rational aspirations.
Yeah, and that's a theme that still resonates in philosophy of emotion today, right? Like, how much control do we really have over our emotions?
Absolutely. And ultimately, for Scudéry, it's free will that allows us to resist those impulses, to correct those bad inclinations, and to take responsibility for our actions.
Right. She says, we are born with the inclinations which heaven was pleased to give us, but we enter into the possession of praise or blame only at the moment we begin to act through reason.
So we're not just determined by our biology. We have the power to choose, to shape our own moral character.
Exactly.
And reason, for her, is like this powerful tool that can actually tame those unruly aspects of our temperament.
Yeah. She uses the example of anger to illustrate this. Like, excessive anger is the ordinary fault of all weak people. It is necessary from the earliest moments to habituate oneself, to overcome a passion which is practically always followed. So it's about disciplining yourself, developing those virtuous habits that allow you to control those passions and bring them in line with your moral principles.
It's a very Aristotelian view of moral development, right? Like virtue is something you cultivate through practice and habit.
Exactly.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about Scudéry's epistemology, her views on the nature and limits of knowledge. And it sounds like Montaigne's skepticism was a big influence here.
Oh yeah, Montaigne is all over her epistemology. She's super skeptical about a lot of knowledge claims, especially the ones based on social custom or popular opinion, which she sees as often being more about prejudice than truth.
So not just blindly accepting what everyone else believes.
Exactly. And she even calls philosophical debates babble, this confusing mess of conflicting viewpoints. Like, maybe we just can't get to those definitive answers about the big questions.
She says, this argument will go on forever. The problem is so complicated, any resolution of it is beyond the power of the human mind.
Right. So there are limits to what we can know for sure.
And she's not afraid to point out the, less than noble motivations that sometimes drive philosophical inquiry.
Yeah, like sometimes it's more about being clever or disagreeing with everyone else than it is about genuinely seeking the truth.
That's a good reminder for all of us, I think.
It is.
But her skepticism isn't absolute, right? There are certain areas where she thinks we can find certainty.
Exactly. It's what we call mitigated skepticism. And the big exception for her is religion.
She says, I think sometimes that everything is so doubtful that one can only support one position concerning knowledge. If I had to establish one sect in this area, I would like to start one where it would be permitted to doubt everything. The one exception would be the things of religion.
So, yeah, faith provides that foundation of certainty for her, even in a world where so much else is uncertain.
And she's also interested in the psychological factors that contribute to our uncertainty, those things that can lead us into error.
Oh, absolutely. And of incertitude, she talks about how our emotions, our feelings, they can really cloud our judgment.
We're not these purely rational beings.
Not at all. And then there's the uncritical acceptance of social norms. Like, we just absorb these beliefs from our culture without really examining them. And that can really block us from seeing things clearly.
She says, as soon as one wants to use one's reason, one realizes that one believes only with great doubt most of those things one thought one knew with the greatest certitude.
So it's about being aware of those biases, those things that can distort our thinking.
Which, again, I think is super relevant to contemporary discussions about cognitive biases and how they shape our perceptions of the world.
Definitely.
And she also acknowledges the limitations of our own personal experience. Like, we can only see the world from our own particular vantage point, right?
Exactly. She says, experience is good for everything. Without it, we would have only the most imperfect knowledge of anything. In my opinion, the only thing we cannot actually experience is death. So even our direct encounters with the world, they're still filtered through our own subjective lens. We never get that completely objective view.
Which I guess means we always have to be open to the possibility that we're missing something.
Exactly.
And her view of self-knowledge is pretty interesting, too. She emphasizes these moral prerequisites rather than just pure intellectual introspection.
Yeah, this is one of the things that sets her apart from someone like Descartes.
Yeah.
Of the knowledge of others and of oneself, she says that to really know yourself, you have to cultivate virtues like justice, sincerity, courage.
It's not just about thinking about yourself, it's about being a good person.
Yeah, and it's about being honest with yourself, being willing to see your own flaws. She says, one must begin by the desire to know oneself free of all flattery. So no sugarcoating, no self-deception.
So true self-knowledge requires a certain level of moral maturity. Now let's dive into her philosophy of religion. It sounds like she actually offers a pretty solid argument for the existence of God.
Yeah, she's not just taking it on faith. She presents this reasoned defense, and it leans heavily on the cosmological argument from design.
So basically looking at the order and complexity of the universe as evidence for a creator.
Right. She rejects that whole neo-Epicurean idea of the universe just popping into existence from random atomic collisions. Like, how could inert matter produce the laws of physics, the beauty and complexity we see in the natural world, not to mention human consciousness and our capacity for reason and will?
She says, I strongly believe that undepraved human reason can and must know God through his works.
So for her, reason itself points towards a divine creator.
And it sounds like she sees a link between moral failings and a lack of belief in God.
Yeah, she suggests that if your moral compass is off, it can actually cloud your ability to recognize God's existence.
Like a kind of spiritual blindness.
Exactly.
But for those who are morally upright, the design of the universe, the complexity of life itself, those things point towards a divine intelligence.
Right. She focuses on the admirable structure of the universe and the admirable structure of themselves, human beings, and asks, how then can it happen that when human beings consider the admirable structure of the universe and the admirable structure of themselves, they are not inclined to believe they have been created by an intelligent, eternal, omnipotent, and unchangeable being?
It's that classic argument from design, like, look at all this intricate stuff. It couldn't have just happened by chance.
Hypothetically.
And she's also pretty critical of the religious skepticism that was floating around in those intellectual circles.
Oh, yeah, she calls them out on that.
Yeah.
Like, they're happy to accept all sorts of wacky claims about, secular stuff, often based on flimsy evidence. But when it comes to God, suddenly they become super skeptical.
It's like they apply different standards of evidence depending on what they want to believe.
Exactly. She uses the example of the heliotrope stone, which was this mythical gem that people were talking about.
Yeah.
And she's like, why are you so willing to believe in that based on, a few traveler sales, but not in God, who has all this evidence pointing towards his existence?
That's a good point.
It is.
So moving on to her aesthetics, it seems like she's pretty much on board with that neoclassical view of art.
Yeah, she's all about art imitating nature. And by nature, she means the observable world, the physical stuff.
Like, art has imitated what nature has made in different places of the world.
Right. And she even gives the example of dance imitating the stars, their movements and order.
So art is reflecting the beauty and order that already exists in the natural world.
Exactly.
But she also seems to recognize that there's beauty in nature itself, not just in our artistic representations of it.
Oh, yeah, she totally gets that. Like, she talks about the intricate structure of a butterfly's wings as an example of this inherent natural beauty.
She says the wings of these little animals account for what is most admirable in them.
So she's not just saying art is good because it copies nature. She's appreciating the aesthetic qualities of nature itself.
But her view of artistic imitation isn't just about, slavishly copying what you see, right?
Oh, no, she emphasizes the role of the artist's interpretation, their individual style and temperament.
She uses that analogy of different painters all painting the same model.
Right. And even though they're all looking at the same thing, their paintings will all be different because they each bring their own unique vision to it.
So it's not just about mimicking, it's about transforming, interpreting.
Exactly.
And she also brings morality into her aesthetic considerations.
Oh, yeah, big time. She believes art has this moral function, that artists have a responsibility to reflect the moral order in their work.
Given art's power to influence people, right?
Exactly. Like with fables, for example, she's very clear that they should censure vice and reward virtue. And the imagination, she says, should always be subordinate to moral judgment.
So no art for art's sake here. It has to serve a moral purpose.
Right.
And she even connects art to the well-being of the state.
Yeah, she argues that the state should be promoting art that's both edifying and aesthetically pleasing. Stuff that cultivates those aristocratic virtues and contributes to social harmony.
It's like a form of moral and social uplift.
Exactly. And she even calls out those lazy artists who don't pull their weight, who don't contribute to that artistic and moral flourishing.
So art has this civic duty in her view.
It does.
Now, aside from all this philosophical theorizing, Scudéry also had this hands-on interest in the natural world.
Oh, yeah. She was a bit of a naturalist in her own right. She had a big garden where she could observe plants and animals, and she was known for her knowledge of botany and zoology.
She even took on Descartes and his whole animal machine theory.
Yeah, that's where her dialogue History of Two Chameleons comes in. Through her close observations of these creatures, she argues for a more vitalist view of nature, saying that animals have emotions, even moral qualities.
Which was a pretty radical idea at the time, going against the whole Cartesian mechanistic view.
It was.
And her descriptions of these chameleons are so detailed, so meticulous.
She really went all in. She documented their physical features, how their eyes moved, how they ate, how their colors changed in response to different stimuli. She even argued against their classification as reptiles based on what she observed.
She's like, hold on, these are not just mindless automatons.
Exactly. And beyond the scientific stuff, she also focuses on their aesthetic qualities, describing their slow, grave, and majestic walk and how beautiful their spots were.
She really captures their unique charm.
She does.
And she interprets their behavior in a way that suggests they have these inner lives, these emotional states.
Yeah, she talks about the intense affection she observed between the two chameleons, and she attributes things like happiness and sadness to them based on their appearance and behavior.
Like she says they seemed happiest when their colors were brightest and sad when they were dull.
Right. So she's attributing a level of sentience to them, an emotional life that the Cartesians would have denied.
It's a fascinating early glimpse into that whole debate about animal consciousness and ethics that's still going on today.
It is.
And finally, we have to talk about Scudéry's philosophy of gender. It's like this thread running through all her work.
It really is. It pops up in her novels, her public speeches, her dialogues everywhere.
Like in her novels, she often explores themes of love and equality between men and women.
Right. And she criticizes the ways women were oppressed in her society, things like forced marriage and domestic abuse.
She doesn't shy away from those difficult topics.
Not at all. And then there's her famous harangue of Sappho, where she makes this powerful argument for women's right to education and even political authority.
Yeah, that one's a real landmark text.
It is.
So, what's the main message of that speech?
Well, Sappho basically condemns this whole practice of denying women access to education, to developing their minds, often under the guise of false modesty. She tells women to overcome the doubt concerning yourself that is planted in your soul. It is this false modesty which prevents you from employing your mind to achieve all that it is capable of attempting.
So it's like, stop doubting yourselves. Stop letting others limit your potential.
Exactly. It's a call for women to embrace their intellectual capacities.
And she takes aim at that traditional division of intellectual labor, where women are relegated to the realm of beauty while men get to do all the thinking.
Yeah, she calls that out as completely bogus. She says, people who claim that beauty is women's sphere and that the arts and letters and all the liberal and rarefied sciences belong to men, and that we women are barred from them, are very far from either truth or justice.
She's like, that's just custom, it's corruption, it's not based in any real difference between men and women's intellectual abilities.
Right, and she points to all these examples of women throughout history who excelled in intellectual pursuits, proving that it's not about some inherent lack of capacity.
She's basically saying, look, women are just as capable of intellectual achievement as men, and it's unjust to deny them that opportunity.
Exactly. And she goes even further, emphasizing the natural intellectual capacities of women.
Like, it's not just about fairness, it's about recognizing their innate potential.
Exactly. She says, the gods have made nothing useless in all nature. Why should our minds be kept in a perpetual state of uselessness and mediocrity?
So it's almost like a theological argument too, right? Like, God wouldn't have given women these minds if they weren't meant to use them.
Exactly.
And she sees writing as a particularly powerful tool for women's liberation.
Oh yeah, she encourages women to write, to create, to express themselves through language.
It's a way for them to overcome those societal limitations and achieve lasting recognition for their intellectual contributions.
Right. She says, it is better to grant immortality to others than to receive it from others. It is better to find glory within yourself than to borrow it from somewhere else.
So it's about taking control of your own narrative, creating your own legacy.
Exactly. And it's about contributing to the intellectual conversation, offering your unique perspective to the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Madeleine de Scudéry, I mean, it's just mind-blowing how much ground she covered.
I know, right? Ethics, moral psychology, epistemology, philosophy of religion, aesthetics, natural science, philosophy of gender. She did it all.
And to think, all this coming from someone who was initially dismissed as, a frivolous novelist, too concerned with courtly manners and romance.
It's crazy how much we've overlooked her.
And it's interesting, right? Because she was hugely popular in her own time. Like, everyone was reading her novels, talking about her ideas.
Yeah, but then later critics like Molière and Boileau, they really went after her in the Précieuses. They thought her work was superficial, lacking in seriousness.
Boileau even mocked the way she depicted love in Clélie.
Yeah, he said, you can see this in Clélie, where the heroine receives her lovers under the delicate name of friend. And more generally, he criticized her for their lack of seriousness, for their airs, for their vague and superficial dialogues.
So it's like she fell out of favor with the intellectual elite.
Yeah, and it took a long time for people to start taking her seriously again.
But thankfully, that's starting to change.
It is. There were some early attempts to rehabilitate her in the 19th century, but it's really been the rise of feminist scholarship that's put her back on the map.
Like, scholars are finally recognizing her contributions to moral theory, political thought, gender studies, her engagement with early science.
Right, and now there are even scholars like Birch who are directly addressing the question of whether she deserves to be considered a femme philosophe, a woman philosopher whose work belongs in the philosophical canon.
Which I think raises a really important question for all of us who are interested in philosophy. How has the historical marginalization of thinkers like Scudéry, women, people of color, people from outside the traditional centers of power, how has that shaped what we consider to be philosophy itself?
Yeah, it's a huge question.
And maybe by rediscovering and reevaluating these overlooked voices, we can start to expand our understanding of what philosophy can be, who gets to participate in it, and what kinds of questions and perspectives it can encompass.
Exactly. Like, what other brilliant minds are out there waiting to be brought back into the conversation?
That's something worth pondering. All right, that's it for our deep dive on Madeleine de Scudéry. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.